Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Conversations with Grace podcast. Our first guest is my friend and fellow online instigator, Matt Zeigler. Matt is a musician, a writer, wonderful conversationalist, the host of the Just Press Record podcast, and also managing director over at Sunpointe Investments. He also shares his thoughts on a wide range of topics through his daily writings over at cultishcreative.com. So, Matt, welcome. Thank you for coming on as the first guest.
I am so upset that I think there's champagne in my closet, or in the fridge. I could have been breaking a bottle on the wall right here for the maiden voyage. This is a long time coming. Your hat's in the ring.
This is exciting. It feels strange a little bit to be the one on this side, saying that it's going to be my thing and bringing people on, because I'm usually on the opposite end where I get brought on as a guest. So it is a sort of a step forward for me, and I'm trying to lead with curiosity. I'm going to be very honest to everyone watching. I am a bit nervous. I did tell Matt going into this that, we're just going to have the kind of conversations that I know that he and I have had multiple times just through our friendship and over phone calls and things like that. So I would like to kind of dive into that without any expectations or sort of set structure. That's good.
It's going to be fantastic. We're going to have a good old time.
All right. So for those of you who may not know, Matt and I, we bonded, I think, first. I don't know, maybe I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But I think from the sort of diversity of our background, and certainly the musical aspect of it, I think, was also something that connected us. So one of the things that I wanted to talk with you today about, the big idea that I wanted to speak with you about, is this concept of identity. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because you have had, sort of different paths that you've walked in your life, as have I. And I thought that that might make for some very interesting conversation. So in order to fill in our viewers on sort of where you're coming from, could you share a little bit about your sort of musical past or upbringing with everyone?
Oh, yeah. So this is the very short, truncated version of it is young Matt really wants to play guitar because everybody in the family, you get together and all the aunts and uncles and other people all have guitars. Everybody's singing all the time. It's music, and it's fun. So I'm one of the oldest two grandkids on my mom's side of the family. I'm the oldest of three in my family. And it was like that thing where you see all the adults you look up to all smiling at each other and having a good time. And you go, I want in on that. And apparently that means I have to get a guitar and I have to do this. So from a very young age, from basically kindergarten on, I start playing guitar, I start tinkering and whatever else. By high school, I work a job one summer doing construction. So I'm basically doing one of those fun jobs where you're like, is this asbestos? And they're like, no, but make sure you get it in the dumpster. And then you see the paycheck and you're like, this really sucks. And so one of my music teachers in school, so he was like a jazz band teacher and whatever else in town, he played in a band with professional musicians, and I was already playing in bands with my friends and stuff, but he knew I could play. And so something happened, a la Back to the Future, where something happens to the guitar player. He needs a guitar player in a pinch. He knows my mom, because my mom's a teacher at the school too, and he says, Marge, is there any way you would let Matt fill in on this gig? I know he could do it. I'll take care of him. We'll keep him out of any trouble. But can he come do this thing? And so sometime around 16 years old, 15 years old or so, I start playing both with my friend bands, doing all our stuff, but then also playing in this band with professional musicians, doing everything from corporate events to weddings to bar gigs. The funny thing happens when you take a kid to a bar. I didn't become an alcoholic, subclinical maybe. But I didn't become an alcoholic at the time. Didn't even drink hardly at all for most of my life. And you're bored. You're in a back room. This is a pre-smartphone era, pre-cell phone era. And all you have to do is read a contract. So it's the only thing I have to read in this back room is how's this set up? How are we getting paid tonight? And all those things. And what I didn't realize was I was learning business at a time when, I'm 17, hanging out in the back room of a bar between sets, working a gig. Mm-hmm. So the trajectory is music and business get intermingled. One thing leads to another. I go through college. I play in a bunch of bands. I do a bunch of fun stuff, run a recording studio for a while. And then one day decided I needed insurance, went into the finance business as a part-time teller, glorious ascension. And almost 17 years later, here I am.
That's, I want to ask you, growing up in that kind of musical family, my family was not musical. My mother played the piano, but in a very amateur sort of way. So I wasn't surrounded necessarily with other relatives who could play music. For you, did you identify like as a musician, as an artist from an early age, like as a kid, like this is my thing, like this is maybe my dream, this is what it is that I want to do? Do you have any kind of recollection of that?
So there's the layers of these things. So yes, as a kid, it was this is what I want to do. This is this fun thing. Everybody is having fun when the guitars come out and everybody gets together. So you want to extend that fun, and you want the power to create that fun. That becomes like a huge thing. And then there's, years of therapy and unpacking this stuff. This is the truth.
No, it is the truth.
You're like, oh, I get it.
Performers, yes.
All performers. I want the tools. I want the tools to create peace and create fun. Like that's what this all boils down to is, and I don't want to be bored. I think that's the other thing that I've come to realize way more in the more recent part of my evolution and all this stuff is it's not just to make peace or to like take everybody's like eye and to like create a fun atmosphere, but it's also this idea of like, I hate being bored. I don't want to go to like, I hate small talk. I hate going to cocktail parties. I hate like the whole networking for networking thing. I'd rather die than go do that crap. What a great excuse to have to go someplace. Again, like I didn't drink growing up or whatever else. Like I played in bars for years and never touched alcohol on a job deliberately because it was like, no, that's not why I'm here.
Yeah.
To be able to walk into one of those things and be like, oh no, this college bar, I would rather die than come here on a Thursday night. But I would love to come in and just capture this room and make everybody have a good time and put a show on because it's interesting. That's fun. That's exciting. That's engaging. And then we're just trying to make the best Thursday night in, whatever, Ithaca, New York that I can make for a bunch of college kids or whatever.
Was it like for you, was music more, so there's definitely that human element, like you said, as a performer. Also for me was very much about, I knew that I don't know if it's about making people happy or giving something to them. There's something that you're sharing with them that delights them. There's some aspect of that really, I think, also lit me up as well. But do you think, you talked about business being an important part of music, which I think a lot of actually artists and musicians, this is the part that they struggle with. But actually, in order to be able to succeed as a musician, you must be able to understand the business. So was that for you? Was there one that was more interesting to you than the other, or were they equally just kind of combined, or did you already kind of did you start to see kind of your leaning towards business from that age, or how was all of it?
Zero, like, see it coming. And again, like zero seeing it like on those terms. It was not understood on those terms whatsoever. So here's like the weird thing that happens to me when I'm in high school, and I'm really important to make this point. Like I'm playing in my high school bands, and then I'm playing like with my friends, and then I'm playing in this band with all these older musicians. And this disconnect forms, and it's layers. We'll go back to this identity word in a second on this too, because then I want to ask you a question about this too. The thing that happens is, so like the wedding band can go out, and I might get, this is the mid to late 90s, and it's like my friend can go work at Burger King or Wendy's, and he can get like $40 or whatever, or like $100 for his week. And I can be like, yeah, on Friday night, I got $200 cash, or whatever it is for like doing a wedding, or $100 for this bar gig, or whatever, all sorts of numbers like that. I was like, but then my band can go out and we can play, and like we might be able to buy Denny's or Perkins like afterwards for the group of us. And why does the bar band get all this money and my band gets no money? And just curiosity. Why does that exist? Why does that happen? I'm not attacking that as like a business person at that point, but I am attacking that with the interest of being like, okay, here's a contract. Is this it? Like the contract that says you're going to pay us this at the end of the night? Is that what I need? Do I need the contract to go to the other club to get that money? And
Yeah.
you try things like that. You find out no. You have people say horrible things to you about thinking about paying you little snot nosed kid who's asking me for stuff. But then you start to realize it's because like, oh, I get it now. There's not a bar in this place. There's not a whatever these other money
Yeah.
making things.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
that curiosity is just from taking your licks, from getting in there and trying to do it and being audacious enough to just ask these questions and see what happens. A lot of rejection, a lot of failure in there.
Yeah. But
But
that's
I
a lot
didn't
of
see it as a
also,
business until way later.
but it kind of shows this agency, right? This kind of agency from an early age to kind of choose how you want this to be realized for yourself. Were you kind of like what kind of kid were you, Matt? Were you like rebellious? Were you the
Oh
good
yeah.
guy? Were you the good kid? Yeah, you were the
Oh
good kid.
yeah.
Okay.
Both. The rebellious good kid. That's
Rebellious,
still
okay.
yeah. That's probably like that should be on my business
And
card or
that-
something. The rebellious good kid. Like to a fault. No, I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest of three, and one of the oldest,
oh, okay.
cousins of a giant group of cousins. And
Yeah.
yeah. The rebellious good kid is probably like the thing. Like I always want to do what's right. I always want to do what's fair. I don't want anybody to feel left out or feel hurt. Again, back to the performer entertainer thing. I want it to
Yes,
feel
yes,
inclusive.
yes.
Everybody can have a good time. That whole thing is
Yes.
there. So that's the
Yes.
good guy part of it. And then the rebellious part of it is just like I'm always willing to try something new or whatever to get
Yeah.
whatever it takes. That's going to be the thing that's going to bring the room together. I'm willing to go there.
Yeah. I feel you on that. Guy. Rebellious Good Kid was probably also similar to me. I have to say, Rebellious,
Siblings? Do you have siblings?
younger. I have a younger brother, so I'm the oldest as well.
Okay, I thought
So
I knew that you were the oldest.
I'm the oldest, and then also the oldest in a family of first generation immigrants, right? So there's a lot that's in there.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
had to,
Different layer.
take care of things, yeah, and all that stuff. So I I think part of being the oldest is because you go first in a lot of things. There is that sort of ability to be able to move through that. And I do have to say, I got really rebellious in high school, like especially the latter part of high school,
What
as I was
tripped you
sort
into
of
that
building.
phase, though? Was it confidence that tripped you into the phase, or did it come out of what
It
gave you
was
the
boredom,
audacity?
I think to be
That's
honest, it was kind of
fantastic.
boredom. Like it was like
Yeah, that's a
I
great
was
reason.
so done with everything and everyone, and I was just bored out of my mind. And I was living on this island. I was in Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific, and I was just like, get me out of here. So the last 2 years of high school before I left, and ended up moving to New York City, it was kind of like paving that path forward in which I'm just starting to like break away from everything and push back and all that stuff. So, and to this day, I think that sort of rebellious nature, to a certain extent, has remained, and that actually ties to. So, speaking of identity, I know you had a question you wanted to ask. But one of the things that I was thinking about is the difference between identity and sort of individualism, which we can get into later. But like, it kind of ties into this sort of part of me, I think, where, and I think it's tied to the artistic part and the performer part of, to not be like everyone else, to not be the same as everyone else in terms of, my voice. Because as an artist, of course, your strength, your artistry is based on your particular voice, your musical voice, and how that differentiates from others, and how people may, really respond to it, and etc. So I think that quality has still kind of remained with me to this day. The need for that. I don't know. Thoughts?
So I have to ask you this because you're a fellow word nerd on these things. The etymology of identity. Do you know
Yeah.
this?
It's same. It comes from this idea of sameness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Which
do
is
you? This was a recent discovery for me, and I'm still processing this. How do you understand the idea of sameness in identity? Because I'm fascinated
so
by this
this
right
is so
now.
this is yeah, this is interesting to me. I actually just also looked it up right before we hopped on this
Oh, fantastic!
call,
All right.
because I had this idea of like identity and, like I said, individuality, right? And they seem similar, but they're very, very different actually, and also in their roots. So what startled me, yes, was this idea of, that the root is same, which indicates something, I don't know, to me, it implies something static. Sameness means something that remains the same no matter what environment, right? No matter what situation you're in, which is why you can kind of see where the word identity kind of came from. And there's this idea that you are who you are, regardless of what environment you're in. But I found it to be very startling because my concept or my idea of identity has always been that it's sort of this, how do I say? This intersection between sort of three, and I apply the same thing to brand identity, by the way, human identity and brand identity. I kind of look at it in the same way. These sort of the intersection of sort of these three areas. So we have ourselves, right? And from there we can, our core values, things that matter to us, that are integral to who we are. And then we have the people around us, our community, right? Whether that be family, our friends, our society, right, etc. And then you have the third sphere, which is the context. So, as an example, in this country, I am a minority. I am an Asian woman. If I were in Japan, I would be part of the majority. And my understanding of self and my identity would be very different given the context, right? And so I've always kind of understood human identity that way. And when I work on things like brand identity, I always put it in the same sort of three spheres: who you are as a brand, your community, your customers, the people around you, and then the context and positioning. And where these three intersect is where identity exists. But then when I read this thing about the root of identity, it made me think about, like, so what is that sameness? What is the thing that does not change? And is it that core value? Is it something that we inherently hold within us that doesn't necessarily alter or evolve regardless of what happens around us within the context? I don't know. It was very interesting to me. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on it?
This is fascinating because I knew you would have some marketing lens to see this through. And I was going to ask you about this anyway. So the fact that you already went within this, the self person context thing is super interesting. So sameness, when I hear it, I think like then you have to have a comparison. So when I think of identity and that the root word is whatever it is, and it's the same as like identical, it implies a comparison. Yeah. And anytime you apply a comparison, it means I need piece A and like piece B, and I'm going to compare them to each other to find out if they are identical. So identity includes some type of matching of at least two things, which is fascinating. Because the other thing, and where I thought identity would have been sourced from before also getting curious about this recently, is I think about like story. I think of identity being a function of story. Story being basically just a cycling of tension and resolution. That's story, all it is. Tension, yes. Resolution, yes. Got yourself a story. So I think of identity as the stories we tell ourselves, the thing that we put tension and then the way we resolve them. And then I think of it at the social level or the community level, which is the stories others tell about us or tell to us, and then how we create tension and resolve them. So what's interesting is I see identity as, okay, what are the things, and whether it's through actions or through experiences that we then overlap to say where there's the same, where there's overlap in your Venn diagram of these three areas, mm-hmm. Like that's what shows you where identity is. But then I also look through it through this cycling of stories, this cycling of tension and resolution over and over again at those layers, both internal to self, the thing that's going on inside of our own brains, and then in our experiences, whether it's with a friend over the internet or our spouse or our mom and dad, or, you know, the guys in the back room of the bar at the club when you're 16 years old.
That's okay. I really like the idea of stories because it's, again, the same thing of how these all interweave together. But then it brings up this interesting, I think, question about how the way others perceive us. And this kind of ties into those boxes that we often talk about collectively in our culture and our society that we get put into and sort of understand our identity through. So, we started off the conversation talking about musician background, the different things that we've done in our life. And I'm at a point right now in my life where I'm really thinking a lot about this, which is why I wanted to discuss this topic with you, because there was the box in which I was the pianist, and there was the box in which I was a certain kind of Grace, and then there was the box fiction author Grace, and then now there's kind of this narrow box of, fractional CMO and marketer. And I have always tried to live my life in a way in which I tried to challenge that, right? And I think I have by pivoting myself throughout the years and doing different things and not being beholden to one thing or thinking that I had to do one thing my whole life. But to this day, I'm still realizing how subtle the stories, that narrative that you mentioned, that run through us, which are not necessarily who we are or what we understand about ourselves, but are influenced by the paradigms and constructions of others, right? So part of me starting this podcast, just so all of you know, is because I realized I have somehow put myself in a box again, which was not my intention, but I got kind of put into this marketer sort of box. And certainly that's, one tiny part of, what I do, but it's not who I am. And so I wanted to be able to break down that box and try to really embrace every part of who I am. But it's something I'm still learning. And I think many of you can resonate with this, that we're constantly finding ourselves, and how do we challenge that? So that's the interesting part to me about identity. And the difference with individualism, because I feel like identity can restrict individualism. So I feel like my individualism is being affected by this box, this identity box that I have ended up in order to help the people contextually and the people around me understand me better. That was kind of a lot, but I'm not sure. What are your thoughts?
Again, a lot of therapy here. Is the box and we can put any word on this, so I'm not attaching specific meaning to these words. When you think of that box, do you think of that box as a boundary, as a constraint, as an imposed limitation on you?
See, that's an interesting question, because I, yes, but then that raises a lot of questions, right? Because there, because you can
It
be who
does.
you are and just, be like, okay, this is just one part of it. But I do this 9 to 5 job, or I do this, and not identify with it. I think for me, maybe that was the kind of the shocking thing I've realized recently, is that because this ties to, again, therapy, this ties all the way back to my childhood of, because I was so unusual from everyone else, and my lived experience was so different. I think I have had a habit in my life of compartmentalizing myself or putting myself in a certain way so that everybody could accept me and understand me. So they may not understand that I can do all these, but they'll understand fractional CMO. They'll understand, because then they can put me in this certain place. And
Spoken like a person who stood on stages in front of audiences to be won over. Yeah.
yeah. So it's that kind of thing that I've realized how deep that runs, that narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and even if I talked in the conversation about how, I'm rebellious and I've said fuck you to all these things and I've done it, but yet still there's that something there that has, I think, in, uh, constrained me. That was a good word you used. Constrained. I feel constrained. And so now my question is, well, what does it mean for me to fully stand in myself? And how does that realize in terms of my business, in terms of my work, in terms of my livelihood and how I support myself? And how can I allow myself to be all these different, embody all of that without limiting myself to one part of it? So that's kind of my existential question at the moment that I'm kind of battling.
Do you feel like, does it have to be a smooth path from the story you tell yourself and the story other people tell about you or tell to you?
It's a great question. I don't really care. Well, no, that's not true. I need to check myself on that. some part of me must care about the stories that others say about me if I am putting myself in the box to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of this, I think, I have been able to find my voice artistically, whether it be through sound at the piano, whether it be through words on a page. I'm still practicing using this voice, the voice
Yeah.
that allows me to be able to say who I really am and this is what I want to do. And also this whole thing is part of that too, for me to be able to really utilize that. So, because one of the things I've realized about artists is that we tend to be escapists. We escape into sound, we escape into words, and there tends to be some element of that, and that's what we kind of. So that's what I did for many many years. That's where I found my sort of solace. But being able to stand in it and to use this voice for myself to articulate my story fully, without worrying about what the narratives others may have about me or what they may construct about me. That's a difficult balance. But then that becomes right. Identity is so much of it is contingent upon these external things outside of us, right? The stories that people tell about, and this is where what I mean about maybe that distinction with individualism, which is maybe I think we mistake the two, because I actually also looked up the etymology of individualism.
Good, because I'm going to ask you for
Yes,
this, because this
yes,
is
and it's the exact opposite of identity. It's difference. While identity is sameness, individualism is difference, meaning what differentiates us.
huh.
So that's interesting because I think oftentimes we make this mistake of, I think, saying, this is who I am, meaning identity as a way of differentiation, when perhaps it might not be, right? I want to share something with you. I was thinking about this prior to our conversation. One of my favorite authors is Milan Kundera. And Kundera, in one of my favorite novels that he wrote, is Immortality. And in that novel, he talks a little bit, identity is something that he's written about a lot thematically in many of his novels. And in that novel, Immortality, he talked about, statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, you know how we oftentimes will, well, no one has a face like ours, right? Like no one, we look like how we are. And we sort of associate these things, the gesture that someone makes, that's very Matt or that's very Grace, and we start to associate them with identity. But he said, mathematically speaking, since the dawn of human civilization, the odds of your face being uniquely, solely like that no one else has ever remotely resembled you or looked like you is very low, right? And gestures, these gestures that we think are so individual to us, we've mimicked them, of course, copied them without even realizing it from the people that we've grown up with or our parents or etc. He said, imagine if you were 40 years old and you had never seen a mirror or a reflection in your life, and you wake up at 40 and for the first time you see your reflection in a mirror. He said, how shocking that moment would be, that you would look at this external of yourself, and would you be able to reconcile it with what you understand of yourself internally, right? Like how you've always understood yourself. And then you see this outer thing and you're like, oh my gosh, that's not me. That can't be me. And so he really delves into this in a very, very interesting way about what we think is uniquely ours, our differentiator, is perhaps not as unique as we believe it is, especially when we consider it in terms of identity that is so influenced by those around us and the context within which we exist. But individualism, I think that implies some degree of internal awareness, self-reflection, some energy, active energy that I think is a little bit different than identity. I don't know. That was kind of where my thoughts went when I was considering the two ideas.
So I'm long fascinated by this, by Richard Dawkins and the Selfish Gene, when he gets into the whole, like he coins the term meme in whatever, the 70s or late
Yeah,
60s
yeah,
or whenever he writes this book. And it's before the internet memes become a thing, but it's this idea of memes are like social genes, effectively. Completely paraphrasing this, but it's this idea. And part of why that's important to explain is like we both have our genetic makeup that make us us, but then there's lots of other stuff that's copied and things. I don't know if like Luke Burgess's, all of his work on mimetic desire, and Renee, I'm blanking on the guy's last name, but mimesis and all
Yeah.
that stuff. There's this whole
Yeah.
fascinating body of philosophy and literature around this that they're going to go way deeper than I'm capable of going on this. However, the identity point of like, where's the overlap? Is this the same? Or the identity point of saying like, this is not the same, therefore it's individualistic and difference. That can run at the genetic level of who we're made up of. That can run at the mimetic level of like what we're copying or what other people's expectations are. Each one of those things is still just a story. And it's a story that somebody's trying to tell, either me up and out to the world or the world down to me, or somewhere in the middle that I'm finagling. And what I'm doing with each of these things is I'm actually just moving a bottleneck. I'm moving a frame of reference to say, look at this from this perspective. Take the snapshot from here, cast the snapshot up through there. It's the same information, just spun around a billion different ways. There's 12 notes. Like, hello,
Yeah.
Western music. This is what you have to work with. Yeah, we got some octaves, we got some other things, but we took the ruler, we divided it into this many things. This is just a foot. Everything is just variations on this from here on out. And so when we think about like identity and we think about stories from this angle, we think about stories other people are telling others, marketing or selling your product, or others that they're telling themselves. It's always the question of same or different at what perspective. And then where's the tension and resolution? Because I think the other thing behind this that I know you and I have both grappled with in our professional and I'm sure our personal lives is, don't have bad tension for the sake of bad tension. Don't be in a box you hate. I've been in plenty of boxes where I've been very miserable in my life, smiling and laughing like a crazy person through it, because that's how you do an impression of me. You just smile and laugh about horribly depressing things, probably. That's what my wife would tell you. And she's not wrong. She's watched a lot of really dark movies with me. She was not happy when I said I was like, it's been a while. I need to rewatch the Godfather series again this weekend, because we're going to talk about a bunch of people who've died recently through the lens of murder and the mafia. But it's understanding, because I could turn around and say all the same things about this. Like, it's understanding tension can be the thing that drives progress in all these framing points. So story can be the thing that pushes you forward in all these framing points. And then that becomes really important. And I've got tips on how to escape boxes based on this stuff too. I've also got plenty of tips on how you get trapped in these boxes. And this thing of just asking, is it the same or is it different, is the most fundamental thing of, guess what? Different is tension. Same is resolution. Yeah. Hello, home key. Welcome back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. So would you say that tension is, I liked how you just framed it, tension is growth. Tension is where the growth is.
Tension is where the potential for growth lives, but tension can just be lingering. Tension can just be, a tritone sitting out there going, dissonance, deal with this.
That's true. Interesting. I like that. How have you, when have you felt that you've been put into a box? Have you felt that in your life? Like,
again, lots of therapy. So a really common thing is when we're going through something where we're not happy with the way something is going, so we want to try something else. So it's like, I'm working in a recording studio, I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm realizing the thing, I'm out of college, it's been a couple of years, I'm making rent, but I'm not loving this thing that I used to love. And all of a sudden you're at that point going, if it feels like work, is this really what I want? Do I want the thing that I love to feel like work? Yeah. I have lots of perspective on how like time could have gone a different way. Zero regrets over it. I'm not going to sit here and fuss over things that you can't change. But it's one of those where it's like, at the time I realized like, I don't love something anymore, so I need to make a change to it. And that's what give me the most friggin' boring job I could possibly have on earth. What's the most boring thing? Okay, I need a complete corporate ladder. I need a giant faceless organization with entry-level work for like an early to mid 20-something who can just go in. And the only thing I knew was people were like, you're good at business. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done anything with business. I'm good at getting a bunch of guys in a van and booking stuff for all over the place. I'm good at running the studio, but I'm not good at business, whatever you mean. Like, I didn't know what a stock or a bond was or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I got a part-time teller job just to say, give me like complete structure. Give me the most predictable, most like, how do you people live with yourselves thing. And I got there, I was all sorts of judgy inside of my head. I was like, oh hell no. I got my little, fun collared shirt and tie and did the whole thing walking into work every day and was just like, I hate this. I don't want any of these people's jobs. I'm completely miserable. It was always going to be a path back to music at some point. It was in the back of my head. And at some point I realized like I was going to have to stay on this path. So then, okay, how can I possibly be happy in this path? And there was one person in the banking center I was working in that didn't look like he hated his life. And I was like, what's that guy do? They're like, he's the financial advisor guy. Great. How do I get his job? And they're like, you need to go the management track. I was like, no, I don't like you. I didn't say it out loud. It's like, if I become you.
So felt. I totally understand that. Oh my gosh. Wait, Matt, did I? Oh, you got color. Okay. Why do you think something that you said struck me about how you didn't love it anymore? Was it because you outgrew it? Was it simply that you outgrew it?
No, it's I can say this strongly now. It's not because I outgrew it. It's because of the competing stories that I had around me at the time. And those competing stories were things like letting go of the narrative around like you're out of school. You're supposed to find a job. This is like the early 2000s. Like you're supposed to graduate and go get a job and do these things. And you've got all these peers and all these friends and whoever else, and they're getting their jobs, they're moving to cities, they're doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. And it's like, Matt's still in like play around with arts like he's a kid. And all that stuff gets into your head and you start going, how do I resolve these tensions? And that just became one of the variables, one piece of the tension that I was like, okay, well, one way to solve this is I'll just go get a quote unquote real job. The first real job effectively I've had since like, I was an early teenager and said, real jobs suck. I don't want this. So that's a great example of the competing stories of the things around me putting pressure both in my head and whatever else. And then the story I told myself was shifting too, because I was like, I'm not happy. Therefore, it must be this other thing must be the problem, not me. So I'll just solve another variable and then that'll make it okay. Surely it didn't, but told myself it would.
That's interesting because one of the things that I'm also currently sort of going through in my journey is when I established Kizna less than a year ago, summer of last year.
Ancient history.
Part of it was ancient history. Yeah. Part of it was this sort of, I had finally made peace with the fact that I did not want to go back to corporate. That not only did I not want to go back, that I hated that kind of like, I didn't want that kind of job. And it was actually such a huge realization for me because I didn't realize how much shame I had been carrying around internally around the fact that I couldn't just do a 9 to 5 job like everyone else. Like, and so again, that external narrative was there somehow, again, to fit in because I had had such an unusual life. And it, like, in order to be valid somehow as an adult human being, I had to like kind of be able to fit that narrative.
Deeply feel this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt that. And so then I said, no. And so when I recognized you are just, that's not your thing. And I accepted that. That was like a huge moment for me. And I was like, okay, then I'll build my own thing. Right. And so I started. But then what I realized recently is that I literally did, like, I built the most conservative business model that is pretty much like a 9 to 5 in which I'm like managing multiple fractional projects and leading it. And so I have yet again, like I said, I put myself in my own box into this thing, this framework into which everyone can understand me and I can present myself appropriately. And I have gotten, it's not that I don't love it. It's just that it's not fulfilling to me in the ways that I think I'm looking for in my life right now. And I realized a lot of that was because I had inadvertently and subconsciously put myself into my own damn box again. And so I am trying to figure out how I can explore a bit more with curiosity in a way that aligns more with myself. But going back to your point, this outer narrative is so powerful. I think and I'm someone who's I consider myself to be a bit more like I am consciously always kind of pushing back against them and kind of aware of it. But even then, it's so deeply rooted and tied up into all sorts of things, from the past and etc., that it's very difficult sometimes to untangle yourself. I like to call it detangling your sort of voice from all of the voices of everyone else. And it becomes a bit of a challenge. So I feel you on that. Do you feel that way now? Do you feel like somehow still tangled up in other narratives?
So I don't think we're never free of them. Like we have to exist
Yeah.
with them. It's the there's this wonderful scene in The Watchmen, the book and the movie. The movie's weird. Did you ever read the book?
I haven't. No, I
It's
haven't.
it's a very important book for me growing up. It's one of those things like you read in high school, like somebody gets a copy of the compendium of all the things, and then you read it, and then you read it again in college, and then you read it after that, and then you read it again at like I literally reread it again like last summer. It's one
Yeah.
of those. It's one of those stories for me. And it's great because it's kind of about like how adults grapple with not creative destruction like the Apple ad or whatever the other day, but creative destruction in the way of just how do you grapple with a world that's perpetually ending, that's perpetually miserable, and like some people want to save it and some people don't, and how do we just figure out how to exist? It's a weighty existential crisis of a story, and it just has been.
Yeah.
And like I get something different out of it every time, so it's one of those books for me. There's a short list of those that I will just probably reread for the rest of my life. Inside of that book, there's a great scene. So the character Rorschach, named after the Rorschach tests and whatever else, so that's his name. And there's a famous scene where basically he's like set up and basically thrown into a prison. And the implied thing is like he's being put in the prison because now the people inside the prison are all coming for him because he was like an ex-private detective type superhero. Okay. And it's this whole like his fate has been sealed by him being put in there. And there's this great like pan out from the in the panels. It's a graphic novel, and it's basically Rorschach saying, I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Oh.
And I think about that reframe a lot of being the stories are there no matter what. The tension is there no matter what, and the resolutions are there no matter what. And that is the key part here. Is you get to choose how you want to resolve these things. So whenever I feel extra boxed in, or I'm like, why am I doing this, or whatever's going on, I start looking for like, okay, what way do I want to resolve this? Yeah. And I think I've given myself an increased amount of permission, especially in the last couple of years of my life. A lot of this happened for me, like getting up, turning 40, and now the years that have come since turning 40, where it's just like, it's not that I don't give a shit anymore, because I do. Back to the good kid with a rebel streak.
Yeah.
But I'm much more consciously aware of like I have to resolve this in a way that feels true to me. I got to resolve this in a way that I feel like I like this outcome. And if there's something else that doesn't, it's me saying to the stories like Rorschach in the jail, like, no, you're locked in here with me because the story's all up here.
Yeah.
So the minimum, it's like people talk about minimum viable product. I'm like, no. It's like minimum viable like persona. Like what's the shred of me that's inside this thing that I can find to take straight to the heart of that thing and that choice. And that means if I'm having a strategy conversation the other day with a buddy of mine, and like, you know what this is like? This is like summer camp. I'm like, this is what I think is going on here. And that's a totally left field thing to draw into a conversation with somebody that's supposed to be a serious business conversation.
Yeah.
But minimum viable person to me, persona, whatever, I'm making this up on the spot. So maybe this is what I do. It's like I just make these random connections and I try to see how far I can carry out the metaphor. How can I turn this knob up to 11?
Yeah.
So it's like I'm having a business conversation. I'm like, this is like summer camp. I'm like, okay, that's at 6. Yeah. You know what? You are confusing the role of the director with the counselor. and you're forgetting how to be a kid at summer camp. And now I'm up to 10. And I'm like, I was like, you know what was awesome? When the counselors play kickball with the kids. But if you make kickball last like 6 minutes and then you make them go play wiffle ball, and you're like, it's the same thing. You change the balls. Like, why are you doing this so fast? And now I'm at
I love it.
11 and I'm like,
Yeah.
now I'm having fun. Now I can do the thing that I do, which is make crazy connections to stuff and make it, again, back to the performance thing. Like,
Yeah.
this is the new version of me with like a guitar in a room or whatever, is me grappling with these ideas and like getting everybody sucked into an idea in the room, because I'm going to find that thing and then I'm just going to keep on turning it up.
Yeah. It's that honesty. I love that, Matt. There's this, because as you were telling that, I realized that that's sort of the compartmentalization that can happen. For
Yeah.
example, me being in a marketing meeting and I should bring up an analogy or something that I learned during my musician years, but not, because I'm thinking that it has to be purely
Which I did for
business, right? And
years. I just,
yeah, and that
you
type of,
squash it.
you squash it and you just kind of, that's there and that belongs there and that belongs there kind of thing. And maybe that's why I wanted to do these conversations, because I could just talk about anything, like from any part of my, it's like so freeing and liberating. But there's really nothing, to your point, you're locked, I what was it, you're locked in here with me,
You're
right?
locked
It's
in
me
here
that's
with
just
me.
gonna, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm the one that is sort of putting these kind of boundaries in a way that doesn't exist. I'm creating that in my own mind, per your point regarding that narrative. So the other day, I know, in my newsletter, I brought up the leadership lessons I learned during my musical years, and it felt so like it was it was more like impactful for me than I thought it would be in writing that, because it felt, again, almost like, am I allowed to talk about this? Am I allowed? But this was how I learned those lessons, right, in my life, obviously. So why would I not share it? But somehow I always felt that contextually it wouldn't work, but it's me regardless, and so it doesn't matter. And so anyways, but that was a very interesting experience. Yeah.
And there's a crappy way to do it. I think this is one of the other things that I'm still learning and processing this very, very much. But it's so much of working in a giant organization. And I always make this joke, and because there's not a better reference point for it. I think of, you know, I think of working in a giant corporation as basically being an independent contractor on the Death Star. You know what you're there for. You know the risk that you're taking. It's a Clerks reference where they're debating if it was unjust that the workers got killed when they were working on the Death Star, if they knew what they were getting into when they took the job. And it's like, yeah, that's, if you work in a giant organization, if you have a leader who's going to say, bring your whole self to work, but not those parts. Like, I really don't want to hear about that. And they're the leader who wants you all to like be playing as a team or whatever else, but they're not on the team because they're the leader of the team or whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah.
All those standards are the things that it's like, okay, I've hated that since I was a kid. I understand the use of those things, but I hate when story is put together in a way where it's like lorded over me so that I can't feel like
Yeah.
I'm being me. And that doesn't mean be the rebel that ruins the thing. I can be additive to it, but I have to be able to be expressively additive to the thing. So I have to be in control of what situations I'm in when I feel like I'm being additive. And the other thing that I've had to learn, which very fortunate, like my wife is amazing at this. This is something I very much have learned from her, is like, it's not your responsibility for the other people in the case where it's not additive. Like, if I'm not additive, I don't have to wait for them to say, you're not being additive, go. If they do, fine, happy to leave. But if not, just take yourself out of the situation.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you weren't being additive. So like, what are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
doing even worrying about how you're going to resolve those 18 open-ended things? The guilt and shame of like walking away from a project you've been working on all this time, and you're like, oh, but I got to send that one more thing. I got to
That's
send that
true.
one more
That's
thing.
true. That's
And in
true.
many cases, it's like, actually what I'm doing is not adding to this thing, is perpetuating whatever shit story it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. 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 Oh, that's interesting. I'm wondering. I'm wondering if so. because there's this element of communication in there. Sorry, it just, that's what it triggered in my brain about how, and maybe you can understand this from the performer's perspective, this idea of how we can remain true to who we are, like honest to the parts of us that are, that want to thrive and feel good about what it is that we're doing, and yet be able to translate that or communicate that in a way that works for those who are, whether it's the Death Star people or the corporate people or this kind of shit that we have to kind of navigate because that is life. And being able to do that, I think it's that balance. So I understand it from a musical perspective, and I understand it from a leadership perspective. I think it's far harder to be able to enact that for your own individual self, in which you continue to honor the things that matter to you and that are aligned with you, or that you want to be, and that make you happy, while at the same time being able to navigate that world of other people who operate right with different narratives. And the reason I brought that up was because of that essay that I had written, in which I took something that was honest to me, but then I wrote it in a way that hopefully they could get something right out of it and communicate and translate it in a way that they could take it for themselves in a way that they could understand within their sort of paradigm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I know we talked about it a little bit offline too, about, the other thing I do is I get hopelessly obsessed with like really minute things, especially if I feel like it's not being not properly understood. Like it's not, I own the interpretation, but I get really focused on this stuff. I get really focused on like the stories being told. I get really focused on what tensions and resolutions are being like opened and resolved, and how, at all sorts of levels. And this is like just a lifelong, I don't know where this comes from. I just know it's there, in the same way music is just there. It's just as far back as it goes. Something opened up that line of communication between the universe and I, and I'm all in when I see it. So I ended up, my wife and I watched the Conan's Hot Ones episode.
Yeah.
And like we're both like tears streaming down our face, like at the end, like this is ridiculous. And I was just like, I have so many thoughts on this thing. And I sat down thinking I'd write my normal cultish creative blog posts, which are like 500-ish words. Sometimes it's 200, sometimes it's 1,000, but it's usually about that. And I like sat down and it was like 1,200 words. And I was just like, there are so many layers to this as I start thinking through what I think. And this ties back to what you're saying, where Hot Ones is great because Hot Ones is an amalgamation of scripts. That's the point I make in the essay that I end up writing. It ends up being like 5,000 words, of course. So it's a small book on a 27-minute YouTube show, because the world needs that apparently, or at least I needed to think it through. So whatever, I don't care. I needed to think it through, and I know how I can make it useful, which is to say most of life is an amalgamation of scripts. You don't know what's going to play out. Is this a game show? I don't know. Is this an interview show? Like, I don't know. I go to work. I call my assistant in the morning. We go through our things. Like, what script am I getting into? Is it Matt, the leader, and the assistant, like the support? These are all scripts. These are all preset ideas of tension and resolution, preset ideas of like status and symbol. It's a dance. It's all a dance. It's all a performance. It's all part of it. The more you know this coming in, the more you can make it interesting, make it fun, make it enjoyable. And so this idea of like being aware of how all these things fit together to then fit how you show up at stuff, it's the only way I know to like affect a difference and to affect putting myself in the situations where I feel like I can bring myself to the situation. And if I get the sense that my whole self is not welcome, or that something is not landing, I either can then choose to repackage it in a way to see, oh, maybe there's another way for me to steer this idea through, because I didn't get myself across well.
Right.
And I'm very willing to play the political game of getting my ideas across well, so long as I feel like it's for the good of the group. But if there's a thing where, again, I don't see that I'm being additive or helping the group or something else, I'm also really quick and willing to like take myself out of that picture.
Walk out. Yeah.
And not in a harsher, like there's no throw the stuff down,
Yeah. Yeah.
storm out
Yeah.
like all upset or
Yeah.
anything. It's just like, oh, I get it. Like I'm not useful to this aspect of the conversation. Now, what's great about that though is if you start to understand these things and you start to understand like what's the job here? What am I supposed to be doing? What's the script I'm supposed to be playing? What's the role I'm supposed to be playing? What's the way I can push this forward collectively? That becomes a really powerful tool. So Darth Vader can't go to make all the Star Wars people mad at me, whatever the Sith Lord guy is like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
can't go to
Yeah.
him and start like cracking jokes. Like he can't
Right.
go to
Right.
him and start like he
Right.
has to
Right.
do the things that he has to do until he doesn't do the things anymore. Like that's part of the great
Yeah.
narrative arc of, Darth Vader is we get to see him go through those things till he finally turns on the Lord in favor of his son, basically. Star Wars spoiler alert if somebody hasn't seen it. But these are the things. These are little meta narratives that are attached inside of stuff. The most important story is the story you tell yourself. So you got to understand that first. And then you got to see how that fits into the context of the other stories that you're playing in. And you can choose to not play in stories you don't want to play in. And more importantly, you can choose to participate in stories where you can be additive. And as you come to find what's true to you, what's authentic to yourself, or where that identity is like, oh no, this is overlap, this is clear stating, then I can go into those places and I can start stating my ideas, sharing them, pushing the boundaries of that group to go, how do we think about this? How do we want to do this? How do we want to solve this? And that's not easy. Like you're going to just keep building new boxes for yourself. But looking at those boxes, like that's just a chapter of a bigger book. Okay, I like this book. Let's put another chapter on it. That's another song for the record. Let's put another song on this record. Oh, you know what? That one's done. Like that one needs to go back on the shelf. Or this one's done. It needs to go in the trash can. Trash nights on Thursday. See you later.
That's interesting because the way that you're framing it is that you had asked earlier if I felt constrained by these books. Now I understand where it is that you're coming from. And it's really the kind of the framework of thinking. I mean, that comes from ourselves, right? That's the story that we tell ourselves, that I am constrained by this. When we can look at it instead, as you said, just a variety of these stories that are constantly happening, and I'm entering, and how can I balance who I am and what brings me joy and what I love within that context, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
And it's interesting too. There'll be, I'm sure by the time this gets shared, I'll have like a bunch of these. So Steve Albini's passing has really messed with me. Are you familiar with who he was, or at least by name, perhaps?
It's okay by name.
So like super important record producer, like just tons of like so many things from my childhood and growing up. A different figure. So there's been this like renaissance with Rick Rubin, who I've also been fascinated my whole life, and it's all this great stuff. To give you like the flavor of like Rick Rubin versus Steve Albini is I'll send you the Twitter link to this. There's like, it's one of the Rick Rubinisms where he's like sharing the quote of like the page, like the nice thing, and it's a really thoughtful like it's one of these philosophical epithets that we love Rick Rubin for. And Steve Albini was way more of like, he's just more of a punk. I don't know how else to put it. But like with all the conviction and ethos, like just one of those people I've looked up to my whole life in a way that I respect Rubin for like who he is and how his brain works in one way. That's a very different part of my brain, and how I respect the way Steve Albini works. And I think this is important too, because like I respect them individualistically. I respect them individually, but they are actually part of my identity and my understanding of them. So like there's this this is from several years ago. Steve Albini died tragically young. He was like 61, had a heart attack at his studio. He was still running in Chicago. And like in this thing, it's this, so Rick Rubin tweets this thing out. Somebody tags Steve Albini in it. Albini responds, and he's basically like, if I ever start like philosophically quoting myself, like somebody can, kill me and bury me, basically. Hit me with a shovel or something like that. And somebody else, I think it's one of the guys from Sleaford Mods, this UK band, like chimes in about, I don't know, it's not egalitarian of him or something, or like, where am I supposed to get the shovel? And he was like, my estate will reimburse you for the shovel. And so beneath the Rick Rubin like meaning of life thing that has a typo in it
Yeah.
is Steve Albini being like, if I ever do this, kill me. And I promise you, my estate will reimburse you for the shovel. And I am so here for the Steve Albinis of the world saying that. And at Electrical
Yeah.
Audio out in Chicago, like he so famously, like the famous quote from 1993 that like I read back then in Rolling Stone or whatever, and then read when I was taking some music classes and trying to learn about how the record label stuff and everything like actually worked. And he famously tells Nirvana before they do In Utero, they come to him after Nevermind and say, we sound too big. We basically sound like Def Leppard. Like, what just happened? We need to reconnect to our roots. And they're like, how do we reconnect to our roots? And they go, remember that time we were driving in the band and we were listening to the Pixies and Surfer Rosa was on and Kurt Cobain said, I decree, like, that shall be our snare drum sound. And who gets that snare drum sound? Steve Albini. So they decide after Nevermind blows up that they're going to go seek out Steve Albini to make their next record as a way to connect to their roots. And Steve Albini doesn't say like biggest band in the world, like sign me up, like get the paychecks coming in. Steve Albini's like, I'm going to send you a small essay on my conditions. And one of those conditions is like, I expect to be paid like a plumber. It's like, you're hiring me to do a job. The art part's on you. I'll make it sound like you make it sound, but I expect to be paid for a plumber. And he discusses how he's like, I'm not taking points on your album. Those would have been worth millions and millions of dollars. And he's like, not in some weird communist way. I'm not taking points because that takes money out of your pockets. I don't think that's fair. That's a stupid construct of the record label system. You want to give me more money down the road? That's on you. That'd be great if it does well. But if not, I don't want the points. Pay me like a plumber. Steve Albini, he made his money. He did well, did very well for himself. He was still running that studio in Chicago until he died 2 weeks ago or whatever. And he would actively say he built a community of incredible people, engineers, and others around him. He had affordable rates for the studio. He ran it locally in the community. He was famous for cooking for both his wife, who's now been widowed, and his friends and everybody in the neighborhood, taking care of people. And he was like, I got to make $30,000 a month. That's the way I pay my rent, and all my people that work for me stay employed. So like that was like his mission for the last, since like before In Utero, but certainly post In Utero for Nirvana. Like one of the biggest bands ever. The band,
Wow.
like Nevermind knocked Michael Jackson off the top of the charts.
Yeah.
And this guy was just like, this is all I need. I need $30,000 a month to like pay rent, keep the studio open, pay for the people who work for me. And that process, those people, that was the most important thing to him. No philosophy, no fancy books. And so this thing, because I'm thinking about this a lot the last couple of weeks since he passed, is two of the people I've looked up to more than anybody else in my life or been just background fanboy about. And it's like that. So the individual differences of what they represent, and then the identity sameness inside of me of being like, I know that's the good kid and the rebel, all wrapped up into one.
I was gonna say it's the good kid. I love that so much, Matt, because it just as they are that for you, we are that for others, right? Also, we fit in different ways in different parts of other people's
And
narratives.
I think we have to be.
Yeah.
Like these are competing ideas. These are not copacetic.
Yeah. I love the rebel good. I'm just thinking in my head also all the things, the disparate things that we love, the things that make up who we are, right? Maybe that's where the individualism comes in. That's the
I think
unique
it is.
sort of what fuels us.
But if we're going to be, tell me how this hits you, if we're going to be a collection of individual stories, using the word deliberately, if we're going to be a collection of individual stories, then we're accepting the inherent conflicts between those stories. And identity is just what overlapping thing are we going to be willing to be the same in there? And then how do we want to carry it across the rest of life? And that, I think that's the biggest thing for me is if Matt wants to get on stage and perform and make the people in the room happy, then that means when Grace says, let's jump on and record a call, I go, great. My job is for the next hour or whatever, make Grace happy and let's have a good conversation. Not because I don't enjoy it, because no, I actually
Yeah.
really, really, really enjoy this type of thing.
Yeah.
So I want to play with these ideas and get this out. And now I have, 18 notes to myself on other things. I'm like, oh, I have to think about this. Get over whatever the complex. Every time I said, good kid in the rebel thing in there. And I'm just like,
That's your tagline.
Completely
You should
reimagine. Yeah, good kid, Mad City now from a whole other perspective.
Post that on your Twitter bio. I want to see it. Like,
yeah, which is also funny because I think of my my uncle Jim used to always joke with me about there's this Alice Cooper song, "No More Mr. Nice Guy," and he used to always joke. He was like, "You need to cover that at some point. You need to be up there like smiling with like the band that doing the stuff you're doing." He's like, then just randomly do that because it's. But again, another great one. Played a character. Like that was the character on stage. The symbolism of like, this horror shock rocker being like, oh no, there's going to be a guillotine. It's going to cut my head off at the end every single night. Like that's a bit that we're just going to do. And it's dark and it's weird and it's whatever. But it's like people who just understand it's a bunch of competing stories. He doesn't go home and have spaghetti with like his wife or something. And go like, oh, I'm still that guy. No, these are just all chapters from all the different books that are all around us. And
but I think you being a performer in particular helps you to understand this very much so. I think that's also why I think your breakdown of the Conan episode was so good, because you understand these kind of nuances of how do we build the narrative and build that tension to the climax, and how do he was so spectacular, by the way. How he did that, it was really fantastic.
When he tells Sean, when Sean asks about bad guests, he actually answers the question about like some guests will turn to the audience in the third line of the interview and be like, I guess this isn't going very well.
Yes,
and I think the quote was he's like 200 souls leave 200 bodies, and you're just like, how am I going to get through the next 8 minutes? And it's just like he's telling you over and over again through that performance where he's like, I know how to be a guest on a show.
Yes.
That's magic.
But also it implies listening, right? It implies such an active level of listening in the sense of being connected to whoever it is you're talking to, you're communicating with, you're in a meeting with, you're performing for your audience, whatever level that may be, to be able to adjust accordingly, right? I mean, and this comes from because I learned all of this in music, and it's very much something I'm constantly aware of.
But that's the story, story you tell yourself thing. If you were only telling yourself the story in your head, like what good is that? You can sit in the practice room all day. You can think you're the best. One of the people, and there were a few, but one of the ones that was like the end of me in the studio is these people are just like obnoxiously trying to book this time, and it's like a mom or a dad trying to book the time for the daughter, and she's got to record some demo because she's going to go to like Berkeley, and she's this incredible singer, and it's all this stuff. And she comes in, we finally get it. It was like, the people where you're booking the meeting and you're just like, oh my God, can we just pick a time and just show up? I just want to do my job. And she comes in and she goes, and it's like, okay. And she was going to record this demo. So I think I hired a piano player for her to come and whatever else. And we like press, she's warming up. I'm like, oh, she's got a good voice or whatever. And she goes to sing along with the piano player, and like no sense of time. I was like this girl's been like no sense of rhythm. Like she couldn't be accompanied. Like she knew how to like kind of sing along. Like she could probably sing. So I had to figure out like she could sing along to like a recording. She could sing along to a CD. So she could let somebody else pace her. But she had no idea how pacing her things worked. And like, so now the parents are all upset. Now she's all upset. And she's like, I don't know. It's not like she was never like, something's wrong with the studio or something like that. But it was one of those where it was like, it got to be very tense and very dramatic. And it was finally like, okay, well, like, this is the thing. But then, by the way, like, I get it. You've just never dealt with accompaniment. You could sit in your living room and sing all day a cappella. Like great, but this is not a transferable skill unless the only thing is going to be you singing by yourself.
Yes. What a fantastic story, man. That's so on so many levels. That is, I was just thinking about what we used to say, at Juilliard and other places is like, we would just say he doesn't know how to listen or she doesn't know how to listen.
Oh yeah.
Because when you're able to listen, you can adjust, right? There's that flexibility and you have enough agency over, you have enough skills and agency over your own self to be able to do that accordingly. It's interesting.
Which is playing in any ensemble. Like that's what you got
Yes,
to learn how to
yes,
do.
that's what you got to do.
There's,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a horrible ensemble story, but it's worth just because it's really funny. And the way the story would basically go is it's I mean, I'm sure it's all historical record. Everybody's dead in the story now. So it's Jackie McLean playing with Mingus, and he's trying to talk about like working out like his chops on the saxophone. I went to the Jackie McLean Institute at the Hart School, and that was where I went to
Oh,
college.
okay.
And so Jackie was still around when I was in college, and little stories like this would be the types of little nuggets everybody would be hanging out trying to get. Like, oh, did you read this? And Beneath the Underdog. Oh yeah, you ever hear him tell this story? And so the version of the story basically goes like he's trying to work out one thing, Mingus is trying to do something else. Mingus doesn't write music, so he would sit down at the piano or with the bass and teach everybody the parts. And, Mingus would say, Jackie, come over here and do this thing. And Mingus would plunk it out. And Jackie would be like, but I want to do this. And Mingus would be like, no, I don't want you to do that. He's like, I'm trying to do. And you're doing like, do. And they're going back and forth. And he's like, so Mingus would say, Jackie, do this. And Jackie would say, but I want to do the thing I'm working on. And Mingus would say, no, you got to do the thing I want to work on. And Jackie would say, ah, yeah. And finally, Jackie's like, so you know what I did? I stabbed him.
Oh my God.
He's like, here's two of the most intelligent ensemble players like in the history of time. And this is what it comes down to.
But then do you ever, so that brought to mind, like, I was just thinking of my own chamber music sort of performances. And I always loved, because I was a soloist the majority of the concert season, I loved whenever I got to perform chamber music because I got to, it wasn't lonely.
Sure.
I could play with other musicians.
Yeah, that's a great thing about chamber music.
That's the wonderful thing. However, I remember, and I have several stories about that, but there was one particular performance. It was with two other soloists. So it was a piano trio. So it was myself, a violinist, and cellist. And we all kind of sort of knew each other. I went to Juilliard with the violinist, and I knew the cellist, from other concerts we had done. And at first, when I heard that we were playing together, I got really, really excited. And then we started like rehearsing, and this was for like a summer festival. And we're three very opinionated, soloists, right? And we had three very different interpretations, and we couldn't agree on anything. Like we couldn't agree on tempo, we couldn't agree on mood, we couldn't agree on like the feel, like nothing. And the rehearsals got rather heated. Like it was tough because we were all fighting for our thing. And right before we still could not come to some sort of consensus or some feeling that we were on the same page. And then the day of the concert arrived. I mean, I even got to the point where I called my manager the night before the concert and I said, I can't do this. I can't play with them. Like, this is absolutely, it was one of those things. And then the concert arrived and we had a talk backstage prior to going out. And we just said, okay, well, we just got to just be who we are, right? So let's just go out there and hopefully it won't fall apart, right? Like we can just get through this. And it turned out to be one of the best performances of the Mendelssohn Trio that I have ever done in my life. And it's so interesting that somehow subconsciously, right, all that kind of battling and back and forth in the rehearsals and everything, such different personalities, interpretations. But ultimately, when we came together in that performance, we ended up creating something bigger than us that was far better and far more interesting and far more, all of that than what any of us could have fathomed. Now, you can't do that all the time because you would literally emotionally and mentally be drained and it would just be horrible.
Somebody would get stabbed.
Somebody would get stabbed.
That would be bad.
However, once in a while, these kind of things, it's like also when you perform when you're sick, you can't do it all the time with 104-degree fever. But sometimes when you're so sick and everything falls away physically, mentally, everything, you have a concert or a performance that's like next level that you could never actually normally get to without that circumstance. So it reminds me kind of sometimes. Have you ever had that where something was you thought was so like not going to
Oh,
happen or so bad,
absolutely.
and then it became something beautiful? Yeah,
There's yeah, and I
yeah,
think what's fascinating about this too is it's the individuals that figure out a way to come together to do this thing for how to resolve tension, whether that happens organically or not. That can be one of those things. Sometimes the more combustible the situation is, the more magic the potential outcomes. And that, likewise, definitely been parts of plenty of things that are just like catastrophically like
shopping. Yes,
fall
yes,
apart. And if you when in
yeah,
a professional setting, like you professionally make it to the end. Like I made it to the end of the session with like the person who couldn't
right,
sing along.
right.
Like I'm here to find a solution. So we're just, if I'm on the clock, I'm finding you a solution, which is a valuable lesson to learn in and of itself. But I think anytime you have that, especially with like, again, this goes back to the, if you strongly disagree on the way to put the thing together or to perform the thing, or, please don't stab anyone, but like recognize like these are the competing stories. And you're going to have to make a choice on like, is this another individual that I want to hold in cognitive dissonance, that I want to hold in this space of like,
Yeah,
oh, how are they pushing me to possibly make this thing better? Is this tension that is growth producing tension? Or is this tension that's just, we're going to just be stuck in this immovable
yeah,
place, and the only thing I can
yeah,
do about this is it's you start the book and you're like, I'm not just not feeling it. Like you
yeah,
start the movie or
yeah,
the Netflix thing and you're like,
yeah,
this
yeah.
just not doing it. Just shut this one off. And like that part, getting comfortable with the quitting,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
that's really really hard.
I adore you. We're nearing the end of our time, so I just wanted to say that I adore you. Thank you
It's
for
mutual.
this
It's mutual. I'm excited you're going to do
incredible
these.
conversation. Where can everyone find you, Matt? How
The
can they
easy,
connect with you?
the easiest thing to do is just cultishcreative.com. That's got all the links on it and everything else, and just increasingly on YouTube these days. So if you go to cultishcreative.com, you can see the YouTube links, but at Cultish Creative on YouTube is the hub. And like you, I'm trying to go. I was good at the performance thing. The
Oh,
the delightful
yeah.
friend, the college friend who I went to, my dear friend Amy, who the day that I had to put on the suit for a jazz performance and the button came off, and I was like, who's the most responsible friend I have? It was my dear friend Amy. And I remember going to her and being like, you have a sewing kit. And her being like, how would I have a sewing kit? Why do you think I have a sewing kit? I was like, I thought of it. And you're probably the person who has a sewing kit. And she was like, damn it, I have a sewing kit. She's like, what do you mean fixed? And so she fixes the button on my pants. So I'm forever in Amy's debt. She's a wonderful marketer, another person now, great, actually very successful published author. Amy Mertz, fantastic person. But so when I started to write and started to put stuff online, I said I was trying to figure out a name. She's the one that came up with Cultish Creative, and she told me like 6 years ago now. She was like, "Why?" She's like, it's great. Like the writing's fine. Like have fun. Like do your thing. She's like, why isn't this video?
Yeah, yeah.
So
We
yeah, so you're
thrived, and
figuring this
yeah,
out too. This is we
yeah.
work in a live
We thrive.
environment.
Yes,
We work, even
environment,
if you're
and
capturing the
yeah,
live environment, we work well in this, and we put in the reps and the hours, not because we didn't slave at these hours.
yeah.
We wanted to do them. We chose to put
Right.
ourselves into these reps. So we got the reps in. So now look, we're having a
Here
conversation, we're
we
recording it,
are.
we're out here doing it.
We're doing conversations with Grace. My goodness, I am so grateful that I met you. That we have the friendship that we have. That I can explore ideas like this with you and feel so safe and good about it. And thank you so much for helping me launch this, Matt. It means the world to me.
Honored to be guest number one. I'll come back anytime.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Grace.